This is our Suburb Trends report for September 2023, and we'll be looking at what property investors need to know when they're looking at investing across the country. In this episode, we'll be discussing the listings landscape. It seems that property listings are generally on the rise, finally, although not everywhere. So we'll be looking at areas where stock levels are expected to stay low and why.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, recently ranked number 5 in Australia out of over 18,000 brokers in the annual MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of an appropriate and experienced professional.
This month, we've asked Kent to identify the tightest markets across Australia, those areas where listings are tipped to fall, even though we're heading into spring. Now, Kent, can you kick us off briefly by explaining how you've tackled this challenge?
Yes, I've used my favourite statistical Area 3, SA3 data. What I've done is I've created a model using my favourite new best friend called ChatGPT, code interpreter, and built a model. So it's effectively a neural network style model. It's a gradient booster is for the nerds out there. Built one model forecasting houses 3 months into the future, and another model forecasting units into the future based on average listings per month. Gave it 2 years of data up until 3 months ago, and then trained the model and then gave it data up till now. And then that, in theory, gives you a prediction 3 months out. And the final result was actually interesting. The model has come back saying or forecasting an overall 3% drop in listings across the board. So that flies in the face of some of the stories that we've all been reading that listings volumes are surging. I'm currently not seeing that, but I'll choose my words carefully because that's what you have to do in this space. Other people might be measuring things slightly different or looking at it differently, and I need to give them some respect and understand what they're doing first. But I'm not seeing it at this stage. Now, what am I measuring? I'm measuring average listings. They might be measuring new listings and then looking at the fresh stuff, only looking at the fresh stuff. I'm looking at the average listing. So we're slightly, maybe a little bit apples, oranges, but they are very correlated, obviously. So there might be some difference in the way we are approaching it. That said, I still stand by it that I don't see a surge in listings.
So you're talking about listings, not just new listings, but listings on the market, right? And how does that?
Total listings, total average.
Because when you were looking at, I was looking at the CoreLogic monthly sort of numbers, and there was a lot of media hype about a month ago. There's all these new listings unseasonally, hitting the market, sign that everyone's distressed. There's going to be this, doomsday scenario where listings are going to go through the roof, and but then when you look at the CoreLogic data for this month, the total listings has sort of been tracking down still. So it's like there's been an increase in listings, but the absorption rate is actually still taking on those listings. We're still buying them. And total listings is still been going down. So it's sort of, is that the number you're more looking at, your total listings, basically the average there, and saying, well, yeah, there might be some new listings coming on, but we're buying them faster than they're coming on still.
Well, the reason why I like to look at average listings is it's one half of the measure of inventory. So I look at average sales per month and average listings per month at any given time, and then that gives you your inventory measure. Now, the beauty then of measuring those two independently is you can do forecasting with both. So typically, if we're looking at sales, you never really know how many properties are going to sell until a couple of months down the track, right? So ultimately, you're doing some argy-bargy with your modelling to forecast what it will be today or next month to give you your inventory metrics. So that's how I approach it. So I'm less interested in new listings because of that reason, I'm most interested in average.
So, but also you've got days on market, because that's a factor in there as well, isn't it? Because one of the things, if you look at an SQL website, there's that total listings graph. So you can look at them for individual suburbs, you can look at them for regions. And what I love about that website is that, well, first of all, you can break it down. You can look at either houses and units, or you can look at a time sequence. So last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and so off, I think up to 180 days. And you can really clearly see when markets are in a downward cycle, that you can see those longer, or the listings that have been on the market for a long time, you can see that bottom section swell up. And then you can see in a faster market where everything's selling, that obviously the total days on market would have to be reducing as well, because those older listings, those numbers, you can see it very clearly in the bar graph that they go down. So I guess that's all part of the average listings as well, isn't it? Because average listings is going to inflate when you've got properties sitting on the market for longer.
Yes. The concern I've got specifically with days on market, I use it, but I don't rely on it a lot for the aggregate stuff, especially. The reason being is when you're aggregating up sales volumes and listings average volumes, you don't really need to worry about the distributions being aligned. And what I mean by that, let me explain. You might have some suburbs with really expensive houses with longer natural organic days on market, right? They take longer. Or you go to a regional areas where properties can take 50 days plus as normal, just normal. So me bringing together suburbs that take 50, 60 days normally with an area like Coffs Harbour Metro that might be 30 to 40 days normal, blending those two together to give you a broader SA3 or SA4 doesn't really work. But blending the metrics for inventory together and aggregating the suburbs does work a lot better. So that's why I do things slightly differently, because I'm looking at it from a total nerd perspective of distributions.
But not only that, but what you've just said is that different local areas have different factors that need to be taken into consideration. And anybody without your depth of experience in this industry wouldn't know that. And that's one of the problems with just using.
They've just tuned in. They now know.
Well, they do now if they listen to this. Well, all I'm talking about is that's the danger with just using data without the nuance, understand the nuance. So thank you for explaining that. Anyway, okay, so shall we go through, because what you've done, you've basically put the top 10, or do you call it top 10 or bottom 10 of average, or top 10 or bottom 10? How we
whatever, the areas that we see that are forecast to drop. Yeah, dropping, forecast to drop
the most
with it. Yeah, and so this is modelled. So forecasting's always got risks attached to it. So I'll throw in those weasel words and disclaimers. But it does look like these are some areas that are declining. Well, you have to. If you're a statistician, you can't go in all ballsy and making big bold statements as if everything's.
Yeah, I know, but as everything's fact. But what you are doing, you're only talking about the next 3 months. That's for starters. And you are giving us all the disclaimers. But what we will do is hold you to accountable. We'll hold ChatGPT accountable in the next full forecast report. How does that make you feel better?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. So, so let's we can drill in. We can talk about some areas, because I think you highlighted a few locations you wanted to drill into to start with, right? So we could start with maybe some Melbourne spots. So let's pick on the first one, Keilor. And that's in Melbourne Northwest. Actually, quite a couple of these are in Melbourne Northwest. Tullamarine Broadmeadows is another one. So these are SA3s. So a couple of key things. So I'll just talk broadly about these markets. Keilor, as of July, the full month of July, typically around 113 average listings versus Tullamarine Broadmeadow 698. So significantly larger market in that Tullamarine Broadmeadows. Price-wise, Keilor 980, big high price. Tullamarine Broadmeadow 655 is the median there. Now, Both of those have fallen in the last 3 months by about 2%. So it's interesting. So this decline in listings volumes may start to flatten that loss of price out, if you know what I mean. So it might stem some of that fall. Most of the areas that we're looking at today that are actually a bit of a balance, if I look at their price change in the last 3 months, it's even split between some going up in the last 3 months and some going down. So this is an example of a couple that have gone down in price. So in terms of inventory levels as well, where are they at? Their Keilor's at 2.13, but Tullamarine Broadmead's a bit higher, 4.86. So that's the data on that. Now we need to move over to the forecast.
That's 4.86 months worth of inventory.
Yes, correct. So it's a pretty high.
I mean, I guess for our listeners here, it's if 4.8 months of inventory, that if the average number of sales per month, happened, it would take 5 months basically to clean out what's currently on the market, which is quite a lot, right? So you need either, if new listings come on, you've already got 5 months of choice, right, in the market, right? So as a buyer, you're not feeling very nervous, you're not feeling very worried when you've got lots of choice. If inventory is like 1 month, right, then you know that, there's not much coming on this month and everyone's buying and it's going to get really tight. So that's sort of the, when you say Keilor, I think you said it's 2 or 3 versus 4 or 5. That's quite a lot.
It is quite big. And the issue is we've got areas have had such low inventory now for the last few years, the last couple of years, that all bets are off with some of the metrics that I was using 3 or 4 years ago, because we used to say 3 or 4 was normal. Well, now we're kind of saying 2 or 3 is normal. So I'd be more interested in the shifts in inventory than what it is currently today. I think that the month-on-month change in inventory or the 3-month change in inventory is really important.
Because we also have a situation, and see, this is why I love to dig beneath the numbers a bit to understand, what's been happening in that marketplace, because the reasons for a fall in listings can be varied. For example, if one of those areas is an area where there's been a lot of, relatively recent house and land packages where a lot of first home buyers potentially bought in 2021, and they're under the most amount of pressure. And we've been talking about the mortgage cliff and talking about distressed sales and all that sort of stuff, which in terms of aggregated data has not been anywhere near as bad as it's been sort of threatened or forewarned in various quarters. However, in certain locations, it has been. And those sort of particularly vulnerable buyers or owners who had bought at the peak and then suffered, 2022 falls and in the interest rate rises, there's been a bit of knee jerking and a bit of forced selling. So some of it may not have been forced, but some of it emotionally forced, shall we say. So would you suggest in some areas that has tapering off, that has been, that has actually inflated listings in recent times and now that's tapering off? Or would you say that there are other causes?
Look, I would argue that there's still some forced sales flowing through, but nowhere near the magnitude that we expected or some of the reports had forecast. So I think people are hanging on, and obviously, if you know how bad the housing crisis is, obviously, people don't want to leave the house, so they'll just do everything they can to batten down the hatches. But the cost of living crisis is probably hitting hardest right now than it's ever hit. So it's hard. I'm not too sure. I honestly don't know. The areas that we've always expected this to be worst are those that bought at the peak and are in those high mortgage belt areas.
Yeah, but if we do dig into a bit of that background of each of these areas, I'm sure there's a different story to be told.
Look, there always is, because we're saying so many of these areas. You've got areas that have very, very low percentages of mortgages, or if they do have mortgages, a lot of them are very small mortgages. So we've seen a bit of movement in markets where there's high rental tenure, and a few landlords have decided to exit I think a lot of that's that they're already stressed anyway, and they're just looking for an excuse. But I think there's a lot of people that are doing it tough with cash flow as landlords and have been exiting of late as well. So I'd probably say that's been a bigger driver of late than the stressed sales or distressed mortgage sales. So hopefully that summed it up. I've got a really interesting bit of data. I know it's not on our agenda, but I looked up since 1945 what the building completion rate was as a percentage of housing stock, and then in 5-year gaps. And I've also done the same thing for our mortgage interest rates. And the last 10 years have been record setting for all the wrong reasons in terms of putting upward pressure on prices. We've never seen such low levels of properties being built proportionate to housing stock, and we've never seen such low interest rates. So we've had a market where everything has been propping up and pushing and inflating prices beyond anything we've seen since 1945. So sorry that wasn't on the script, but
No, it's interesting.
it's interesting because nothing's normal. Nothing we're looking at is normal.
But you'd have to argue that an underbuilding is going to continue, right? Like borrowing capacity issues, builder issues, material issues. And I know the government wants to build $1.2 million homes, but the reality is, like, when the approvals are all-time lows. So over the next 5 years, developers aren't risk on; they're risk off at the moment. So you'd have to argue at least for the rest of this decade, probably, that we're going to be significantly underbuilding again.
Prefab. I think we've covered that many times. The only answer I've got is prefab, and lots of it.
Then isn't hard. Well, having said that, though, our governments across the board have reduced their spending in the social housing and community housing sector for decades now. And so that's something that is certainly changing. And we're going to have Michelle Adair come back on very soon and talk to us about that as well. And so that you don't have to worry about developers when it's government money,
I've only got one. One trick pony for me. It's the only solution is a massive injection of public housing, and I'm not talking rounding error numbers. I'm talking big numbers
to make up for all the years that
40 years.
The sole responsibility for providing rental stock in this country has been provided by individual investors practically for many, many years now. And that is going to have to change because obviously it's a broken system.
And Chris, this is your domain in the finance space. Talk to any property developer or builder. The finance constraints have been huge. So, yes, we've got labor and cost constraints, but the biggest constraint has been financing for new builds.
Yeah, and I think a lot of investors aren't going to buy the new builds. I think the governments, want to build 1.2, but the reality is the investors going to buy the new builds. I just don't think they're going to fall for it like they have in the past. I think that they're going to be a bit more savvy. They know about the building issues. They want to play in the established market. They want to go regional and they want to buy established. There's enough property people out there, trying to get their money that don't want to push them down new. And so I just don't think they're going to get the investors for it. And I don't think investors are going to sign up to it under 6% interest rates. So I think investors will come back to the market. Like I was just looking here at CoreLogic, looking at mortgage rates. And so back in 2011, the RBA was at 4.75, and then it started to really drop, 2012, 2013, 2014, 15, 2015, 16, the RBA rate was all dropping. That's when investor participation went through the roof. So, investors, I think, will come back to the market when there's lots of rate cuts, which isn't great for prices, right? So, and they're going to be competing with home buyers as well. So, I don't think you're going to see investors flooding into the market in the next few years if rates stay high.
Well, not only that, but there's quite a lot of negative sort of sentiment around investors at the moment, and quite a lot of uncertainty around how individual state governments are approaching their tenancy legislation, and we're all for fairness and good legislation here, but it's sort of like the political will is around making it sound like you're just very pro renters and not so pro investors, sort of forgetting the fact that without investors, you've got nothing to rent. So, I guess a lot of investors are sitting a bit shy at the moment thinking, is this an environment I really want to buy into? Apart from the cost and apart from the fact that interest rates are high and now prices are rising again in quite a lot of areas, it's like, hang on a minute, they might legislate to make things unpalatable. And, we've got legislation on Victoria is talking about quite some pretty sort of not very attractive to investors or not for investor favourable legislation. Queensland's tried a number of times. I don't think this is necessarily going to go off the table. And you've got the Greens, yelling out that they want a 2-year rent cap, which we can argue about on another podcast, I think, and we'd like to have a debate on that as to, what that could potentially do if I don't think they're going to get that through somehow, but you know what I mean? So there's quite a lot of negativity around from a landlord's point of view or from a potential investor's point of view. You're thinking, I don't want to risk that. I don't want to put myself in an environment where I might have these controls forced upon me that I have no say over, So.
Well, but at the end of the day, supply. We need supply.
Well, that's exactly right. And so there's all these arguments out there about, you're making it hard for investors. And you go, well, investors aren't building the properties. They're just buying what's out there. So, this argument doesn't even help supply really, but it does take properties out of the rental pool if investors are selling out and they're not selling to other investors.
Well, and then the other flawed argument is if investors pull out, prices go down, that's a good thing. I then counter by saying, is the person that's currently renting that property that's now being listed for sale in a position to buy that property if it drops by 10%? How far does it have to drop in price to be affordable to that person who's currently renting it? And odds are 9 out of 10 are not going to be able to afford to buy if they're trapped in that rental.
Correct. But also I know that it's we look back to 2016 and that property boom was fueled by investors. But if you get down to an individual property level, and that's just because there are more players in the market, right? But if you get down to individual property level, the investor is unlikely to be the highest bidder over an owner occupier.
Well, that's so my point is that it's a flawed argument to say, prices would have to come down by 50 or 60% to be affordable to the largest part of the rentals market. So the argument really is now, sadly, we've got this 2-tier society and we need to fix it or remedy it as best we can with a massive injection of public housing. I can't see any other option. So NIMBYism has to end.
Yeah, it's funny. Scott Keck, very well known, Charter Keck Kramer. So we've asked him to come on the podcast. He said he's coming on, but he's a super busy guy. We've actually had Richard from the team on, and he came up with a really good idea. I'll say that I also had the idea in my head. Whereas, you've got, millions of spare bedrooms, but, as a homeowner, as soon as you know tax, that you're going to have to pay tax on the rent and it's going to affect your capital gains, you're disincentivized to rent out any space, whether it's a granny flat, whether it's bedrooms downstairs. You're more incentivized to bypass the government and try to play on a cash economy, because you got a mortgage, you want to help people with their mortgages, they should just be able to rent out the room, but it's just not that practically available. And I think his key thing that made it a really good idea is that, there's for a 3-year period, you can do it and it doesn't affect anything. And that would just give us a short-term, immediate, available supply of housing. And I think that was, because at long term, it probably, maybe they don't really want to do it long term, right? Maybe they want to get some tax and maybe there's reasons there, but at least try it for 3 years. And I thought that was a really good idea. And, if you're trying to solve the rental crisis, why aren't we considering?
Oh, have you look at some of the SA1 data that's got the number of people per dwelling, the average persons per dwelling, or, the number of persons per bedroom, but the persons per dwelling, it just tells you the answer. There's vacant bedrooms everywhere. And all we've got to do is kind of maybe look at 5 bedrooms per SA1. There's 250,000. Boom.
Yeah, I read somewhere it was 14 million empty bedrooms in this country. How many empty bedrooms have you got in your house, Ken? How many empty bedrooms you got in your house?
One.
How many
It's
you
a
got,
funny
Chris?
question, to be honest, because we all sleep in the same room. Even though there's four of us. We've got a 3 and a 1-year-old. We like to live as a close family. Even though they probably should be in their own bedrooms.
Cubs.
But yeah, so if you technically, if they're all in our bedroom and the cats are in there too, so we've probably got 3 spare bedrooms.
So you got one. Normally you would think you got one, and I've got one. So between the three of us here, we've all got one bedroom spare. Put your hand up if you're going to rent it out, though. If this comes up.
Hey, I might put the house up on Airbnb. So Airbnb doesn't make sense either, because like when we went away to Fiji, if I put that on, I've got to pay tax on that money, and I'm going to fit my CGT, and it's a nightmare admin wise. But if I could use Airbnb for 2 weeks without having to worry about the tax on it, I'd more likely use it, absolutely. Secondly, I mean, some houses have got like granny flats and they're ready to go, right? Or, self-contained, and they're more than happy to have, rent a room out. So I do think there is a lot of rooms there. It's just not everyone would obviously sign up to it. But I do think even just for short-term emergency accommodation between renting, like, if you're able to offer that, and especially under high mortgage rates, when rates are 2%, like you're not that worried about your mortgage. But when rates are 6%, an extra few $100 a week is the difference between having to sell your house or not. So I think it's a timely thing there.
But as per his article, his post, he was talking about aged people. A lot of people living by themselves in 3-bedroom homes who are in their 70s and 80s and 90s. Very large.
I mean, there could be a matchmaking service there, to help them out a bit too, slightly discounted rent.
It was a really sensible post.
Let's get back to the topic at hand here, which is our listings. We've talked about the availability of empty rooms.
I was scrambling while we were talking just to get the different Sprit worksheet up. Tullamarine Broadmeadows, I'm forecasting 11% drop in the next 3 months with the model, and Keilor is a -9%.
Right. But then you look at Monash is on the list as well, right? So you've got suburbs like Glen Waverley, Mount Waverley, Oakley, Wheelers Hill, Notting Hill. It is a little bit expensive. So that's a total different demographic, isn't it? And so this is where I think it's interesting to contrast some of these pockets to say that the reasons for those, I mean, what's the change there? But the potential reasons for that projected fall in listings, I imagine will be different.
Yeah, I'm not really well equipped to give you the answer on the reasons. I've just modeled the data with what I can see, and it looks at a whole range of different measures. So yeah, I can't really put my hand on my heart and tell you why they're dropping, but there's some anecdotal things that I'd probably argue that if somebody can't find an alternative property to buy, they will hold. And there's this chronic supply. As I said, going back to 1945, we've never seen such a period where so few new housing, new stock is coming online. So I'm probably going to point to that as the number one issue, is that there's such a chronic shortage of options for somebody. So I'm just looking at it now. So we've got between 2020 and 2024, the forecast here is about 3% new stock. Between 2015 and 2019, 3.8%. There's never been a lower period. Never been a lower period since 1945.
And I like to look that same website that Veronica was looking at. She said SQL earlier in the episode, but not SQM. But on the total listing, yeah, it's.
Oh, did I? Sorry.
What's interesting, because I've just played around with it with lots of different postcodes, and I agree with what Veronica was saying is that, under 30-day listings, yeah, I mean, that's interesting. But what's interesting is what doesn't sell, right? How many properties are sitting on the market more than a month, more than 2 months, more than 3 months, more than 6 months? And that's what SQM shows. And all the suburbs I was looking at, the longer term listings are starting to evaporate. And especially the 60 or 90-day listings are really down. So it's showing that yet we're absorbing the new stock and we're actually buying the stuff that people haven't wanted to buy for a few months. And that's, and if you look at the 2018, 2019 downturn, which was driven by the credit crisis, right? And the Royal Commission and Sydney prices, we're not talking Sydney here, but, Sydney prices fell 15%. You absolutely saw listings way higher than where they are over the last 12 months. And I think it's really interesting to because that was a really fearful environment. And then when positive came into the market, in Labor lost the election, if that's positive or negative for some people, APRA changed the assessment rates, they had rate cuts, and bang, you got competition on tight listings. And in that late 2019 period, prices rose good 15%, I would say. It was extremely fast bounce back. My worry in this situation is we're getting price increases on ridiculously low listings after a 4% increase in rates and a 40% reduction in borrowing capacities. What happens if that starts to flip the other way, right? Like, what happens if rates start getting cut under really low listings? What happens if borrowing capacity starts to shoot up because APRA come in and say, well, I'm going to cut the assessment rate? And I think, and even though 2019 prices jumped a lot, but that was on a lot more listings. What would happen if we're going into a potential more positive property market? Prices are stable. We're not worried about inflation as much anymore, but we're going on a ridiculously low number of listings that are getting eaten up. And yeah, that can only lead to one thing, unfortunately, for people who want to buy who haven't bought.
It's actually an interesting perspective, that one, because I hadn't actually really thought about the fact that, yes, well, I have thought about it, but not in that way. I track, back talking about Sydney, we've had a bit of feedback recently that we're too Sydney-centric, and so apologies there. But I guess in terms of actual personal examples are often going to be Sydney because we are based in Sydney. Well, Chris and I are. But obviously here we've asked Kent to focus on the research in other areas so that we don't forget that a lot of our listeners are from other areas. But certainly when we talk about Sydney, and I talk to buyers agents and sales agents even in Melbourne, and very, very similar pattern happened in Melbourne. I talked to Megan Wells about Brisbane. It's very different patterns. Brisbane basically had 10 years actually more than that, nearly 20 years between booms. She talks about the big boom in 2002 and then again in 2021. So different cities do behave differently, although Sydney and Melbourne are quite in tandem. Their numbers may differ in terms of the magnitude, but the patterns are very similar. And certainly when we're dealing with like a really constrained market back like we had the middle of 2017 right through the middle of 2019, those properties really did swell up, those long listings. There's no doubt about it. You can see it in that chart that we're talking about there. And it was difficult to sell, and listings were also drying up. New listings were drying up. This is where it's interesting what you're talking about, Kent, looking at the average listings versus new, because the market was shit, and yet listings were drying up purely because people knew they weren't going to get their price. So this idea about forced listings is what's causing price falls. You still hear that, and it's like, actually, it doesn't actually work that way. And yet here we are. I've been tracking clearance rates over the last, say, I think about 6 weeks. So we're recording this mid-August. So from the beginning of July, clearance rates in Sydney have been around about that 70% mark, which is just into seller's market territory. And listings, numbers of new listings, that is for new properties coming onto auction, have been steadily and steeply rising in that time. But the actual clearance rate has been holding quite firm. So, yeah, I mean, I think I've never really thought then, well, what about when interest rates fall and people's borrowing capacity starts improving? Then, yeah, what does that mean?
It's a bit of a coiled spring.
Yeah, and I just, to not make it Sydney-centric, I did go to Melbourne just here and just played around with it. And so if you look at places like Hampton, a decent-sized suburb in terms of land area, and you look at what their listings were in 2018 over 30 days. I'm not too worried about under 30 days because that stuff may just get absorbed. But the stuff that's over 30 days, it was like 170 listings versus 80. So you can see the stuff on the market that's over 30 days is double what it was back in 2018, 2019.
So it's Bayside, right? Bayside SA3.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting way to look at it for you, Kent. I'm probably looking at one of your competitors, I guess, SQM. But
Yeah, that's all right. So I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at inventory for the area. It's 1.88. It's just chronically low, and its high point was last December at 2.77. It's just been crawling down since. So listings are way down. Like the listings for that area was 243 back in November. That's just fallen down. That's down to 138 average listings now. So, and we've seen prices starting to tick up. I think they got down to their lowest at 1.89 million back in December. That's climbing up to about 1.93 now. So, it's being driven by this extraordinarily low supply.
So let's have a bit of a look at Perth because, Perth is a bit of a funny city. It had a really crap 10 years and then had a bit of growth 2021 like everyone else. And prices I think the growth has slowed down from memory last time I looked at some national figures. So what are we looking at there in terms of inventory? Because it's a very different market to the eastern states. I mean, like, for instance, it's not an auction market at all. So you've got just properties selling private treaty over in Perth. Tell us.
Yeah, a lot of the buyers agents have been telling me this has been where they've been parked for the last year. So there's been an influx of a lot of investors being parked over there. And I think looking back.
And when you say part, you mean that's just they're basically putting all their clients in?
All their clients moving into there. So they were in South Australia, Adelaide, and then they've all moved over. I'll rephrase that. A lot of the ones I'm talking to have been very focused on Perth.
Do you have off the top of your? I was talking to somebody who's involved in the sort of lead generation space, and he didn't give me any numbers, but he said, I just got this insight into how the numbers of people that are been buying through some, like a handful of buyers agents that do huge numbers. Now, I don't know what he means by huge numbers, but I think he was shocked at the potential to move some markets. And a lot of individual buyers agents would say, I don't have that power. My client list isn't that big. But I think if everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, then perhaps there is that potential. What sort of numbers are you talking about?
That's interesting. When I first started Suburb Trends, a very wealthy investor was lined up to buy into the company on the condition that I put my thumb on the scale for that purpose, for that reason. Needless to say, I didn't take that money. So it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Okay. So because, yes. So I guess that's where you have to understand fundamentals of property markets. And if there's a massive proportion of investors buying into it, we talked earlier, investors don't push up prices on an individual property, but if you've got a lot moving into an area that are not from that area, they're not owner occupiers, there is very little owner occupied demand, then that is going to move prices. And also particularly if they're buying from interstate and they don't know any better.
Look at the inventory levels we're talking about. Some of these areas don't have a lot of stock, so it only takes one or two extra buys. I mean, it's the thing that's driven most of the excessive price growth outside of the Sydney, Melbourne area, especially in the COVID exodus. Look at what happened in Northern Rivers. Look at what happened down the South Coast.
Yeah, but that's not really investor dollars, is it? Like
No,
Northern
it's just
Rivers
excess
and
demand.
say the Southern Highlands.
It's extrinsic demand. It's not from the local area. It's not local
It's not
buyers.
natural.
It's not local budgets.
Yeah.
So these are areas that are, especially if they're removed from the capital cities, they don't have the same volume of tradies. So as soon as you absorb that excess stock, it takes a lot longer for it to come back online. So that's why these areas have suffered. These regional areas have suffered so much. Sorry, we jumped ship. We're talking about Perth. Look, in terms of the forecast, I'm looking at in the next 3 months on average across the areas that I've analysed about a 5% drop. Now, That's the average there. But you asked specifically about inventory. So I'll just have a quick look. So, I'll pick on a few
listings,
areas.
remember? Listings.
Yeah. I think, but you did ask the question. You wanted to know a little bit about inventory as well. They're still quite low. So there is only one area, Melville, that's got a little bit higher inventory. It's about 4.3 months, but that's still kind of low, right? 4.3. The rest of them are all below 3.
And compared to when?
That's just current inventory level. Yeah. So that's current inventory, and but inventory levels have been dropped. They have dropped. So there's demand coming in now. So we're talking month on month, a 1 month drop in inventory everywhere, pretty much inventory dropping.
I think that the real takeaway with this is that, the reason we're talking a lot about listings and inventory is that it's supply, right? It's not how many, looking at the CoreLogic report here, there's 11 million dwellings, it's 11.0, right? It's been 10 million for quite a while. We're up to 11 million, right? And, and that doesn't mean there's 11 million properties to buy, right? There's probably 150,000 properties on the market right now to buy. So, whereas in the past, it might have been 250 or 300. And, and that's really the supply is how many properties can you actually buy right now, and ridiculously tight across our whole country. And so while we're potentially seeing this reduction in demand, just because it's so tight on listings, that the demand that is sticking around is still keen to pay current prices, even under high interest rates. And people aren't wanting to upgrade. There's nothing encouraging people to go and, upgrade their home when they've got to pay higher interest rates or, et cetera. And so I think we're just going to have to really track this over the next 6 months because, if you're worried about price falls, well, that's potentially proven that low listings is going to hold prices, which it sort of has. But my worry is probably on the other side now is that could we see a bit of a kick where, the buyers that have got the buying capacity, the buyers that are doing well financially, they're the ones who could very quickly move prices back up. And the buyer that should be able to buy, maybe in the past, maybe they had decent borrowing capacities, I feel like they're going to get pushed out really quick because they're not going to be able to compete. If prices move another 5 or 10%, they're blown. They're already spending all their budget. And so I can see some pain for buyers that have got briefs that are very close to what current prices are. And because if we start to see the rates don't have to get cut for buyers to factor them in. If there's this consensus view that rates are now not going up anymore, which will probably happen if rates don't go up for another 2 or 3 months. But if, CBA came out this week and said rate cuts are 1% next year, all the other banks, etc., if that starts to flood the front pages, buyers will quickly factor into their decisions. Actually, you know what? We've got no fear here. Rates are going down 1% next year. Let's get in. And so before rates even get cut, you're going to see potentially even further price growth if that's what happens. So because it's very low listings, and then that'll be FOMO, they'll miss out, and low listings can see price rises quite fast. So I think it's a really interesting conversation. We should keep tracking it rather than, listeners might think we're going on about these listings so much, but it's so important to track it because that's really the canary in the coal mine. If listings really increase, which is what all the media were saying last month, which we realized wasn't the case, then you'll start to see some price rises and the property bears will be loving it. But that's not what we're seeing, right? We're seeing very tight listings, if not getting
We just
tighter.
don't have the new stock supply. Yeah. We've got population growth, no new stock supply. So, and I don't want I don't think it's healthy anymore. I'm starting to sway camp. I don't want never-ending price increase. I'm at in a different camp now because I'm thinking this is creating societal issues that I'm not happy with. So that's just okay. I'm coming from a very different angle here, but I think prices have gotten to a point where it's damaging, and to keep on growing like that, it's not a good story. But I'm just talking to the truth, and I do think, Chris, everything you said is going to happen.
Yeah, and as long as prices go up in New Lambton, then Kent's okay. That's probably the catch here.
Look, it's all relative. It's all relative. That's why I view it. It's yeah. Hey, they could halve.
It all depends what you're going to do with the money.
If it halves everywhere, I don't care. I'll go and move into something that's,
Oh, unless you've got a huge mortgage, because that doesn't halve. The price of your property halves. It doesn't. Your commensurate debt doesn't adjust accordingly. But I do think that, and I actually agree with you, Ken. I think that you know, the all the rhetoric at the moment is around the supply and the rental side of things. You know, we used to have this big affordability debate about first home buyers, and now it's affordability around renting, and we've forgotten about first home buyers again. But you know, and at the end of the day, there's not a lot of sympathy for first home buyers when some people can't rent for their family. You know what I mean? So the first home buyers have sort of dropped down the pecking order a little bit. But I do agree with you, Kent, that it will cause problems. Inequality and growing inequity does cause problems. Look at the French Revolution.
it's exactly like, it's all the stars align. It looks exactly like the same period. You know, and we're going to be telling first-home buyers and renters to eat brioche.
Yes, let them eat cake. So, okay, so that's. Do you have a link for this report on your website? Because we could always pop that into the show notes.
Yeah, look, everything's just on the home page. You can find the website's just devoted to kind of one big blog now, so you can just come in and find the blog post with this. Yeah, lots of blog posts there. I've been using...
Look at that nice photo view on the back of it. I'm just...
ChatGPT, I'm going nuts. I'm using it for the analysis and getting it to help me write content. So a lot of I'm producing 1 or 2 big posts a day now.
Now, we actually interviewed Luke Metcalf a few weeks back about AI in the property space, and we've spoken to you about it in the past as well. And just before we wrap this episode up, obviously there's something that you're working with, but can we put a little caution in there? Because it's all about the questions you ask, though, isn't it, Ken? I mean, you're creating models. You're not just going, you don't just literally type in there saying, where's inventory going to fall the most in Australia? And I just want to clarify that that's not what you're doing.
Oh, no. I use it as a...
No.
It's a tool. It's a tool. And what I do is I create...
It's a number crunching tool for you, right?
and I give it prompts that have 25 years of nerd mashed with my data sets. So it's got effectively, 1,000 words in the prompt. It's saying, this is how you interpret, this is how you input, this is how you read it, this is how you write to it. And then what I do is I throw in the data set. So the data that it's using, clearly I'm telling it, you must only use the data I'm giving you. Then it just works as a script writer. It's a journalist in the corner or doing heavy lifting, doing the statistics crunching. I'm not asking it to produce data. I'm asking it to crunch and write about stuff.
Which is, I really wanted just to bring that up, because otherwise, and also there's different versions of ChatGPT. I mean, you're using ChatGPT 4, I'm presuming,
and Code Interpreter. So I'm going to throw a plug in for something I've done that's awesome. What we've done is we do an AI match of 50 off-market match properties when someone sells a property, right? And we match it based on price and distance and owned for 10 years. And then what we do is we pull those 50 back, and then we feed them into ChatGPT and we say, write a personalized letter to each of those 50. And then with the ChatGPT 4 and Code Interpreter, it generates 50 letters in a Word document that you can go click and print. So you can sell a property, have 50 letters done in 10, 20 seconds, and then have them hand delivered within an hour of selling your property. Mind blowing.
Yes, you're offering to sales agents.
That's to real estate agents, yes.
Yeah, to their prospecting. But your use of the word off market and the general way in which we use the word off market is different. You're basically saying 50 properties that are not currently on the market, as opposed to 50 properties that are off market, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. You can buy this one if you give me 100 grand more than it's worth.
No, these are the types of properties that you should be knocking on the door or doing a letterbox drop to say, I want to give you an appraisal. You should get an appraisal because I've just sold a property just like yours. And you should be rather interested in this sale.
Yeah, without them having to do all the work to find the sale, to write the letter, to, etc. Yeah.
And that's the magic of that's these chat GPT. That's what it does. It does all that heavy lifting stuff. So as the saying goes, it's not AI taking your job. It's the person who's embracing AI and making full use of it who is going to take your job.
Yeah. So, and look, I just wanted to really hammer at home that you're not, and if anyone just thinks they're going to jump into ChatGPT and go, right, well, I want to know where should I buy an investment property, I've plugged some questions in and I've been horrified at what comes back, because garbage in, garbage out, right? Whereas what you're doing is asking it to interpret your data with the parameters and the instructions that you've given it. And I think that that's a really big distinction, because I don't want people going, oh, well, whatever Kent does, I can do that now. They don't have your property smarts. They don't have your insights and your experience to be able to know also whether it's garbage, you know.
Yeah, I'm not using it for its brain. I'm using it for its brawn.
Got it.
Thanks so much, Kent. And yeah, I think it's interesting to keep tracking these listings. Obviously, what are we talking about next month, Kent? There's some going with AI we did a report on, isn't that right? Or what are we talking about?
Ooh, yeah, well, I did a report that's now a couple of months old. What I did was I analysed the suburbs that I thought were going to be most impacted by AI.
Which, you know, we were going to do this month, but the reason we sort of switched is because the listings data is coming out saying, new listings data has come out saying that, you know, spring's going to be pretty hot. So I thought this was quite topical, but how about we sort of go back to what we were originally going to do, and we can do that next month.
And I could even refresh it. I could refresh it because the analysis was based on the 18 different codes for different, you know, the industries of employment. And then the percentage improvement in terms of productivity against each of those 18 categories. What I might do is reprocess that, because I've already got all the numbers set up, and effectively it's the number of people employed per suburb in each of those 18 categories times the percentage. I just need to update that percentage with a refresh. There you go.
And AI is going to come back and help you tell us what jobs AI is going to steal. Excellent.
Yes. You can't word it like that. You can't tell it. It won't play. It won't tell you the doomsday stuff. You have to trick it and say, what's the productivity gain for this industry?
And then know how to interpret it. That sounds good. Okay, so that'll be a November episode. We look forward to that chat. Thanks so much. And yeah, been great chatting once again.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.